I guess is like DBT probably came onto the scene about 4 years ago, and just in terms of like something that you started hearing about if you were a data engineer, and by now, like I went to the DBT conference called Coalesce maybe 3 months ago, and it is enormous. Like it's bigger than like I went to RubyConf. It was way bigger than RubyConf. It's bigger than like kind of any of these. Just like in terms of the amount of people that show up and the number of companies. Like that itself just like kind of showed me how popular and widespread this tool is, and really just in like I said, like maybe 4 or 5 years. Um, so in terms of kind of what we've been doing so far, we've mainly done, especially I'd say at least the first pipeline we really saw was purely in Python, and that was this ETL Python pipeline, right? Where like we hit an external data source, have this client, then we have our adapter, right, that transforms our messy data, loads it into Postgres, right? Then the next thing that we saw was, I guess I'll uh, draw it out, right? Then we kind of saw this prefect model, right? Where if this is prefect, we used our prefect orchestrator to have some Python code that would hit an external API. And then we kind of said there were different things we could do with it. One was we could, you know, have this Python script that hits the API and then just, store the raw data. That's actually the model we'll kind of stick with. So store some sort of CSV raw data, meaning like as close as possible. And maybe we have a Python script to do this, right? That we have our client and then basically just something that loads our data to CSV, right? And then stores this in what we called, like staging. And then from there, we could transform the data and like kind of load it into Postgres. Essentially, you want to do as little, the current model is to do like as little transformations as possible to then basically keep the data as close to its raw form as possible to then, I guess, read it from staging and load it into your analytics database. So this will be, for right now, we're using Postgres, but you can imagine that this is another kind of analytics database. And we can talk about that in the future, but like we could have used, Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery to load in this data. Okay. Why are we using Postgres? Just because we know it. It's easy to get set up on it. Because we don't have to kind of go on a detour and learn about these tools. We'll go through at least these two in the future. But just know for now, they work. There's nothing really new. There's maybe 95% of it works exactly like Postgres. Redshift is built on top of Postgres. Postgres is open source, and they built Redshift, on top of it. Snowflake again works 95% just like Postgres. In terms of the SQL that you write, it's more like probably 99%. And then there's just very like little features here and there that they add on. Underneath, they work a little differently than Postgres, but we can talk about that later. So the idea is, right, like with Prefect, what we're doing is we're using Prefect to automate us hitting an external API, loading our raw data to staging, meaning that this is like CSV data, could be JSON data, could be HTML files, but keep it as raw as possible so that we can load it into Postgres. And then from there, this is where DBT comes in, okay? So if our data is always going to stay in the same database. Whatever data we're loading it into here, it will stay there. And DBT will interact with this database to basically make transformations on our data. Okay? So the idea is instead of transforming the data like in Python, we're going to transform it basically through SQL queries in DBT. All DBT does, like really all it is at its core, is just a code base for writing SQL queries, like a kind of a preferred code base or a recommended code base for writing SQL queries. We'll see that. But the idea of DBT was like these transformations and these changes, these SQL queries became more and more complex. Before the world of DBT, they were just like more and more complex and disorganized. And DBT basically said, hey, if you organize them this way in this code base, we can, your life will be better. You should, basically use best practices in engineering, meaning like organized into separate files and like all the stuff you've learned about like having a Git repository and making commits and adding tests and things like that. That's what basically DBT encourages us to do. And what we'll do is, we start with our raw data and then we'll use DBT to like make, basically create different transformations in the data. We'll see how we do that, but essentially the way you'll do it is you'll write select statements. Like let's say we want to lowercase some of our data, and we start with a table we loaded in some raw data of categories. All you'll do is you'll essentially just write like select lower of the name from categories. Okay? And really, what DBT will do, sorry, I can't type anymore. What DBT will do is do something like create table, and whatever you want to call it, like maybe we'll call it staging categories as. Okay, so this will basically create a new table called stage categories, and this stage categories will just be a transformed version of, by transformed I mean just like cleaned up version of our original raw data. Okay, and then maybe we'll make another transformation until we get into like the form that we want, right? Which is our data mart star schema type of thing. So like ultimately we'll get to kind of like the star schema that we saw in the last class, right? So this pattern right here, this is like our ELT pattern as opposed to ETL. And the idea here is, by ELT we mean extract, like pull the data from the API and then load it and then perform the transformations. And the transformations here occur in the data, like in the database, right? As opposed to when we were doing this with Python, right? We were making the transformations through Python, right? Before we loaded them into the database. So this is, it depends on the team, but this is becoming more and more popular, right? This ELT pattern. Why is it more popular, right? So the difference is, if we're going to compare, right, ETL versus ELT. Why is like ETL more popular? One is all of this is in SQL, okay, and more people know SQL. So that's one. Like data analysts know SQL. Some product analysts might know some SQL, right? Like that's helpful. So if more people know SQL, right, and it's hard to navigate, right, like a Python code base for a lot of individuals, another benefit is you can see all the transformations that occurred just through, going from table to table to table, where you can see, our raw data looked like this, and then we had a transformation that, created this kind of cleaned up version, and then finally we got to this other version. All of these changes, all these tables will be in the same database, okay? So if I give you access to the database, you can see all the data. Like you can go back and see the raw data. You can also see kind of the MART data as well. So it's like all the data in one place, meaning like the database. As opposed to in Python, right, like we have that original data, we get it as JSON, and then we quickly make the transformation. But if I'm a data analyst, I can't just write some SQL to query the raw data. Just to one kind of sidebar, the data will be in different schemas, right? We've seen schemas a little bit before. They're just different folders, essentially. So a schema just holds a collection of tables. So we might put all of our raw tables in one place, and then all of our staging places in a different schema, and all of our like mart tables in a separate schema, right? And so you can just kind of like now, if you want to see the raw data, you'll just view those tables in under that schema. And again, like you'll become this will become more obvious or more easy to understand as we actually do this. But so like I said, most people are kind of moving to ELT as opposed to ETL. ETL is still like very valuable. Like I said, there may be some like there are lots of code bases that use it. There's still lots of people that don't know about DBT, so they're still using an ETL pattern, and Python just isn't going away. So those patterns that you saw, they'll still be used, but in a more kind of like classic, I guess, like modern data pipeline stack, this is more what you'll see, right? So just to review, kind of like the stack that you can imagine is, we need prefix still to hit our APIs. You're not hitting your API from SQL, right? So we need to use our request.get method to hit the API, and then we do want to probably store data in a data lake, right? Why do we say this? Because we can always just hold on to this data. We have this copy of purely raw data, and it's relatively cheap just to store it in a CSV. So we'll hit the API and store data in a CSV file. Then we might need to do kind of as little transformation as possible to load it into Postgres, right? And that if it's just purely HTML data, that might be extensive amount of work, right? To just pull out the information we need and transform it into a row in the database. Then once it gets in the database though, right, and we have this data and it can be fairly raw, then we perform the transformations. And all those transformations will basically go from the raw data to a cleaned up version of the data to our final form data mart. Okay. What DBT does is it connects to your database. So it's just a place for you to write code that's interacting with your tables and in your database. All right. And like I said, again, we're using Postgres because this way we don't have to get set up with it, get set up with a new tool. But in many companies, right, the standard would be to use a tool like Redshift or Snowflake. Okay. But also these things cost more money. So this saves you a bit of cash by not having us sign up for this. All right. And it will work. It's not any harder to get set up with Snowflake and Redshift and use DBT. It works the same way. Questions about this kind of architecture? This is important to this architecture, this pipeline that we're using. We'll do it again with Airflow, essentially, but this is an important architecture to just understand, because this is probably, if you did a project or in your externship, or just when you eventually work for a company, a lot of companies will use a variation of this type of pipeline. All right. So now we can, I guess, get set up.
I guess,
yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
one question. So in this diagram, right, so we have the staging location, which can be a database or just anywhere to store data. And then you have the Postgres. And then is there a third database at the end? So there's going to be 3 different locations for storing data in this flow?
Okay, that's a good question. I think you're part of what you're probably asking about is the OLTP, right? Where does that come in? So let's say you have a website, that Amazon or something like that, and now for my analytics team or my data science team, etc., we want to do some analysis on it. So just remember, in order for the website to work, that itself is going to have, a database. And that's our OLTP database. And that has, all the tables for our website. And so we're also going to want to, we could use Prefect, and we could use Prefect, you could use a separate tool, but you could use Prefect as well to take the data from your transactional database, right? That's like consumer facing, and move it into your analytics database. All right. And you could also use Prefect to say, like, hey, maybe, like we said, maybe there's some third party data we want, and we also want to move that into our analytics database. So the whole purpose of a way to think about it is the OLTP, customers are interacting with that, right? Like when you go to Amazon and you get information about, like, what the pair of shoes you're buying or whatever, like that's going to, how does it know the price and the brand, etc.? It's getting that from the database. Now, for the analytics database, and when that you made a purchase, that's also being stored in the transactional database. So everything that occurs, everything to power that website is going to be stored there. But then we also want to, have an analytics team, a data science team, an ML team that works with the data. And so they don't need necessarily like live. Last time, it's very rare that they need live streaming data. Instead, what we'll do is maybe like set a prefect to every day migrate the new data, move the new data from our OLTP into our analytics database. And our analytics team, which for Amazon would be like thousands of people, are going to be working on the analytics database instead of the transactional database, right? What are reasons for this? One, like these guys have some optimizations under the hood, that speed up some of the queries. And like I said, we can talk more about that later in the course. Two, we just don't want to tax, right? Like our customer-facing database with all the work that our analysts are doing, right? They're going to write some queries that will like look through all the data. They might take a while to run, and now they're competing, our customers are competing with our data analysts to get a response from the database. So for these reasons, right, we're going to basically copy the data from the OLTP and move it into the analytics database. All right. Once we get to DBT, DBT is now taking the data that exists from the analytics database and making the transformations, is like now cleaning it up for the purpose of analysis. Other questions about this? Did that explanation make sense?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it, right? Like, obviously there's gonna be a big difference between like production company with millions of users and what we're doing, and I'm just kind of getting an idea of like the smaller projects we're setting up. Should we still be thinking about setting up a couple of databases?
Most companies will still, like, for instance, the startups that we partner with and like externships, sometimes we've partnered with fairly small companies. They'll typically have a separate analytics database for doing analysis. Now, they may not use, some of them, for instance, won't use Snowflake and Redshift because they're more costly. They'll just use Postgres, and honestly, I think that's the right move because there's no reason to use Snowflake or Redshift at that point. It can just be cheaper and simpler to use Postgres. But they still typically would have a separate database for just their like consumer facing and for the internal data teams. Okay. Cool. All right. Then we can get set up. Let's see how that happens and see if I can do it. I'm sure I'll probably have to cheat, but that's okay. So the first thing I'll do is basically go to this Northwinds Postgres setup lesson. All right. And you can click on the collab, but I'll just go through it. So what we need to do is, so it's here, this Northwinds setup. So you clone it down, right? Git clone, blah, blah. Then we cd into the code base. And you can see that basically we have this northwinds.sql file. And this is just a long SQL script to set up your database. Okay, so this is a like out of the box, right, like sample database, and basically that I forget, maybe Microsoft created it or something. So it creates the various tables we'll need, as you can see, and then also we'll insert the data. Okay, and associate it. So it's like a nice way for us to get some sample data into Postgres. So how do we do that? We'll just do PSQL. You can see the different databases I have. I think I deleted my Northwinds one. I have the sample one, but let's create a new one. So create database Northwinds. Okay. And now that created a database, if you do the \L, then we should see that new database there. Okay, cool. So now press Q, I hope, to get out of this. And what's next? So we just created the Northwinds database just with a simple create database call. The next step is to run the script. So how do we do that? PSQL-D, so the name of the database is Northwinds. And then I want to run the file, right? I want to run this file against my Northwinds database. So PSQL-D on the Northwinds database, run this file northwinds.sql. And now I press return, and you can see that's inserting a lot of things and creating tables. And it seems like it worked, but just to make sure, I like to connect to the database. So PSQL Northwinds, and then I can just display the tables. So here's all the tables that were listed, and now I can maybe like select all from customers, limit 2, 3, just to confirm that we actually have some data in there. So this looks like it worked. So now at this point, we have our database set up. The next thing for you to do is then to go to this lesson for DBT core setup. Okay, and we can clone down this as well, which I already have it. DBT core setup Northwinds. Do I though? Yeah, I think I do. All right. So if you CD into the code base, this is actually, I'm going to remove this because I'll do this for you now. Yeah, when you seed into the code base, it will look like this. It will just have requirements.txt. And if you look at the requirements.txt, all it has in it is DBT core and DBT Postgres. So this is the DBT library, DBT core, and then this is like the connector to connect to a Postgres database. All right, so just remember, DBT is going to be connecting obviously to our Postgres database. So now what do we do? So we want to probably create a new Python environment, Python 3-m venv, and that will create that venv folder. So now we have the venv folder. We need to do source venv bin activate. All right, so now this thing is activated. Ooh, was it already activated? Let me do deactivate and then activate it again just to make sure. Okay. And now I just want to install. So now I've created an environment. I've activated the environment. The next step is to install the libraries here. So pip3 install -r requirements.txt. And this is installing those two libraries, the DBT core library and the DBT Postgres connector. And next I'll just do dbt -version to make sure that's taking longer than expected. Okay, to make sure that it is installed. And it's installed. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, I'm going to ignore that. Cool. What's next? The next thing for us to do is create a DBT project. I want to call it the same name as it says to. So let me look at what I said to do. No, not this. Hold on. DBT core setup. I just want to make sure I give you all the same name. So it's Northwinds DBT. So now I'm going to, you'll see what this does. DBT init Northwinds DBT. I already have something. I'm going to say no. Actually, I'll say no, but really what I'll do is once I do this DBT init Northwinds DBT, it's going to try to walk me through something. I would walk me through the steps. I would rather, you just kind of move through the steps. So I'm just going to press Control-C here. It looks scary, but it's not so scary. You can see what it did was it created these two folders for me. The logs, right, which will store the various SQL transformations we make, and then Northwinds DBT. So we'll obviously like explore this a lot, but remember what I said is that DBT is really just, like a framework for, and really like a suggestion for how to organize our SQL queries. So, for example, you can see that they are giving us these different folders to stick like our analysis. These models folder, we'll learn a lot about them. This is to like make our various like transformations. Seeds, this is going to be to like where you can put, it's kind of nice actually, you can put CSV data, and just by virtue of like moving it into this folder and running a simple command, it will upload the CSV data directly into Postgres. So it has like and tests, right? We talked about like a place for you to do tests. So for right now that you need to worry about though is this dbt project.yaml file, all right, which is like configuration, right? So you can see what it has here. It has this is the name of our project. Name your project. It has a nice little documentation too, right? Northwinds DBT. This is the version of our project that we're using. I don't know what this means, config version. This is the main thing you have to pay attention to. This profile Northwinds DBT. It says this setting configures which profile DBT will use for this project. So what does that mean? So one thing you'll notice in this project.yaml file is there is nothing about our database, right? Like the word Postgres is not showing up, I don't think, here. That we had a database called Northwinds, right, that we want to connect to, but that's nowhere to be found here either. So the way this is going to work is this profile right here is going to point to another secret folder that you have when you install DBT. So if I go to my home directory, so cd tilde, right, and then there's a hidden kind of directory which I can cd into .dbt. All right. If you don't have this, I think it should create it for you. Otherwise, you probably can just make it. But cd into the .dbt. Because this has a dot here, it will be hidden unless you do like the ls-a. So now in this directory, you can see it's just a directory. It has this one profiles.yaml file here. So let's take a look at this. So what you'll need, and I have it's in the directions, is you'll just need this section. Okay? So what this is saying is this Northwinds DBT, right, this has to line up to this word. That's probably the most important thing. Where it says profile here, it's then going to look for that .dbt folder, the profile.yaml, and look for this key. Okay? And then you'll see that the target dev is the schema that basically we'll be writing to. I think, actually, here I say JK test. I can change this to dev. This is our connection information. So just like we had to like specify connection information in scicop G2, right? Like information about our actual database and what Python should connect to. It's the same thing here. We're just specifying like, oh, we're connecting to Postgres. Host is on the computer. Here's my user. Here's my password. Here's the port. Here's the database name, right? If you can't connect, give up after 30 seconds and just use one threads. Remember we talked a little bit about that last time. One thread to do the work, to make the connection. All right? And that is now, like you'll have to fill this information in, but like I said, the reading tells you exactly what to put in there. You'll just put in your own username and password. At that point, we can go back to our code base, which is where? Jigsaw curriculum DBT lessons, DBT course set of Northwinds. And now we have inside code base, we have this Northwinds DBT. So far, just to recap, you basically will change nothing here. You'll just confirm this Northwinds DBT setting here, and then you'll have to fill in information in that .dbt folder that has the profiles.yaml. Here I'm connecting my code base to this profile, right? So this word here is lining up to this word here. Now I'm back in my DBT code base, and all I have to do is run DBT, I think just debug. I'm not sure if that's it. That might be fine. Okay, yeah, I think that was right. So this is just for me to confirm that the connection is actually working. So you can see it's using DBT, the profiles.yaml file. It found it. This DBT project.yaml file, that's coming from my code base. The profiles.yaml file comes from that hidden ./dbt folder. It found Git, and it was able to make a connection. This is the most important thing. You can see that here it's connecting to my database. Where is it getting all this information from? From right here, okay? From this profiles.yaml file. And then it says everything connected, meaning it was able to connect to my database and everything's okay. All right? Now that that's fine, then we can actually I'll just show you an example of what we'll do. So just remember, right, if I let's go to my Northwinds database. So I just went into Postgres, connect to Northwinds. Sorry about that, why did I do that? And I want to look at my tables. And then let's just select star from categories. And we'll make a simple change. Yeah, why did I do that? Okay, so you can see that the category name is uppercase. And we have this description, etc. So here's what we'll do. We will change, if we're making transformations on our raw data, we'll change the category name from uppercase to lowercase. All right? Simple enough, I hope. So let's exit out of here. Let's remove the example. We don't need that. And then instead we'll make a directory called staging. And then let's make a new file in staging called stage categories.sql. And now we'll go here, and in models you can see we have the stage categories.sql. And we're going to use a CTE. So we'll do I'll call this with, really this is my transformed categories as. And then I'll do select all from categories. But I don't want to select star, right? I want to transform the data. So it was category names. So do lower of category name, I think. Let me just look at it one more time. So we had category name, category ID, description. So let's hold on to this category ID. So I have category ID, category name, and description. Okay? And now we need to end every CTE with a select statement. Select all from transformed categories. And you don't need a semicolon here. In fact, if you put in a semicolon, I'm pretty sure it'll break. So delete the semicolon. And now we'll exit out here. I'll just get in the root of my project and I'll write dbt run. And then just hope. Ah, beautiful. It completed successfully. So look what it says. Started a SQL view model, whatever that is, in dev.stageCategories. Created the model in dev.stageCategories. And now, so first of all, where did this dev.stageCategories come from? Dev is the name of the schema, right, that we said that we would create our DBT models in. Just remember we did that here, right? We said that the schema under profiles, we said we're going to do this under dev, okay? So it created that, and then stage categories is the name of the table that we created. Where did that come from? It came from the name of this file. So it took the name of the file and created effectively a new table under the dev schema called stage categories. So let's take a look and see if that's true. So now we'll connect to the Northwinds database. And now, if you just display tables, all you're going to see is the original tables, right? There's no stage categories here. But if you do /dt dev.star, this will display the tables under the dev schema. And remember, I told you schema is just a folder, okay? So this is the public folder, effectively, right? Schema is public, but then this is just a new folder. And it didn't work. Man, that's annoying. Why did that happen? It said it did. Unless I'm connected to the wrong thing. Let me see if that's true. Select all from dev.stage. It told me, right, that it created dev.stage categories. It is there. I don't know why it says it's not. I must be using the wrong command for this to display the tables. But you can see that, right, I have this new table called dev.stage categories. And then, and look at this. I'm so silly. All right. It had this as lower. Let's change that. I'm going to change this to be category name. So it did make I'm just going to give this an alias. So it did make the transformations for me, right? But it called my column name lower. So how do I fix this? I just made the change here in the code base and then just call dbt run again. Okay? This should run the code, and then we'll just connect to Northwinds. Let's do select all from stage categories, and now, right, this has been fixed. So what dbt is doing for you, you're just writing a SQL query. You don't have to even put a CTE here. You can write any SQL query. What dbt will do is it will transform this into code called that looks like this. Create table. Really, it's doing something called a view. Create view as, and then wrap that in, right? And wrap this whole thing in the view, and the view's name will be stage categories. So it will take your select statement and turn the results of your select statement into, and use that to populate a new table. So that's what you're seeing here. What we did was we wrote this select statement that transformed our data, and then it took the results of this select statement and it created a new table called stage categories from it, and it populated the data with this transformation. All right, let me see what questions we got. Did that dbt command overwrite the existing table in the dev schema? Yes. All right, so when I do dbt run, it's going to look into my models and recreate the data. If you want, you can specify, like there are options. You can do dbt run. I forget what it is, like -- models, and then you can like specify the name of the file you want run. I'm probably gonna. It might be something like that. Oh, that worked. So if you only want to like update one of the files, you can do that by specifying which model you want to fix. And then Narapati is asking a great question. Can you also see the compiled SQL code in dbt? So right, the point is, what I was saying is like when you write this right here, SQL.categories, what it's really doing is it's taking this code and it's translating into like create view as stage categories, and then wrapping this right here, wrapping your SQL query, whatever you put here, in this create view thing, and that's how it's creating this new table. So kind of the steps are for dbt: one, compile the code first, meaning like translate this into this, and then two, run the compiled code against your database.
Yeah, you can see your compile code in the target folder.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so I'm about to show you all where it is. So you can see that. Is it in the target? Yeah, I guess you're right. Target, compiled, and then here's the stage categories. But no, this is probably just one step of it. Here's the run folder, and now let's see that there. Okay, this is what I was thinking. Right, create view, northwinds.dev. So the database, the schema, the table. I don't know what this is, but it was pretty close. And then here's my select statement, and then there's the kind of the end of the whole statement, right? Okay, so this is at least pretty close to what is running against your database. And the reason for looking at this is, if you're trying to debug, right? Like there's more and more kind of transformations DBT can apply to your SQL, and here you can start to see it. So how did we get there? If you look at the target folder, then you can see this compiled, and then you can also see the run folder, and each of them then has like a whole like mimic of your code base, where it shows you what code it was compiled into. How can you write tests in DBT? We will get there, but in this folder. For right now, you can do that in this folder, but we'll get there. All right. Cool. So yeah, we're going to start small. There's enough, obviously, to get set up with here.